Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third of our CIPSL, or Center for Schools and the Center for the Promotion of Social Emotional Learning and the Center for Schools and Communities webinar series. This is our third series. We're excited for you to join us today. Our presentation today is Co-Regulation and Connection, the Crucial Role of Adults in Children's Self-Regulation, with our presenter and friend, Colleen Patterson. She is one of our consultants for the I Can Problem Solve program and Raising a Thinking Child. So welcome. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Colleen Patterson. Welcome, Colleen, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all. Thank you for joining. And I am just going to share my screen. There we go. So today we are going to be talking about, skipping ahead. We're going to be talking about co-regulation and connection and this crucial role of ourselves as adults that work with children, that maybe have children, that live next door to children, wherever you are interacting with children. And I'm very excited to talk about this with you all today. But before we begin, I love to start, if any fellow Brene Brown fans out there, I always love to start with a little two-word check-in. I do want to say, just as to add to the community agreements, please feel free to use the chat. You're welcome to unmute yourself as well if you have questions. But you know, as we move through, I was just saying to Stephanie, if you told me in high school that I would never think an hour was enough for a presentation, I would have thought you were lying, because now an hour doesn't feel like enough. So so please feel free to stop me. I might be moving fast to try to get the information to you. But before we begin, I like to start with this little mindful moment to just check in with yourself. Think of 2 words that might describe how you're feeling right at this moment. Feel free to put them in the chat as you think of them. And, you know, they don't have to be related. So I would say right now, this morning, I am feeling very excited and also a little bit tired. 2 different things, but can exist in the same moment. So I'm just going to open and look at the chat real quick and see what people have. I see calm and eager, overwhelmed and excited, head spinning, content, excited, anxious and curious, anxious and hopeful, tired and hopeful, calm and tired, sleepy and chilly, excited and disorganized. That's often my state right there. Engaged and sleepy, tired and determined, at ease. Oh, these are great, you guys. Tired and excited, gloomy and tired. You see all the overlap. This is why I love to start with this, just to see where everybody is beginning in this moment. Fuzzy but content, tired and excited, open, chilled, hopeful, curious, content, excited, grateful, and hopeful. Oh, thank you so much for sending this. I always chuckle. Usually I get one that's like under caffeinated, something like that. But thank you so much for doing that little check-in. So as Stephanie said, my name is Colleen Patterson. This is my crew right here on the page. I am an educator by training, also a former yoga and mindfulness teacher. I say former, but I still use it in my current role where I am both an ICPS and a Raising a Thinking Child trainer, and also in my full-time capacity, I do coaching and professional development for teachers. And you'll kind of see why I've gotten into that, why this topic is so passionate to me. I've got my 2 dogs. I love the show Ted Lasso, and I'm from New Jersey. So any fellow Jerseyans here. And so just a bit of a background, as I was in education, as I was teaching yoga and mindfulness on the side, you know, I started to recognize this connection between, excuse me, my camera goes in and out of visibility, so I might get a little bit blurry at times, but I started to just see how the importance of, you know, my regulated state in the classroom. And so one thing that would happen, I'm going to stop this for a second so I can be clear again. There we go. So when I left the classroom, and then, I worked for the migrant program for a little bit, and was supporting students in that way, working with their families. And then when I left the migrant program, I started going into schools and teaching yoga in the preschools locally. I'm in Pennsylvania, Central PA. And I started going in, and I would get these, kids, they were 2, 3, 4 years old, and we would, take the elevator down to this little gym space, and kids yoga, I think some of you might be familiar. It's not quiet. It's very loud. It's there's a lot of movement, and we're engaging, and we're breathing, and we're playing. But I would always make time at the end to have them lay down on the ground, do a little relaxation, maybe take a little stuffy and have their bellies go up and down. And I could get about 1 to 2 minutes, which for 2, 3, 4-year-olds, pretty good, of like relaxation and silence. But this one day I'm coming back, bringing them back, delivering them back to their individual classrooms. And as I opened the door for one of the boys' classrooms, preschool classrooms, they can be loud and a little chaotic. But the thing that struck me most was the teacher was yelling in that moment. She was yelling at a student. And it occurred to me in that moment that I can do all of this work and I can teach the kids all day long, all these skills, but it's only going to be undone if they are going back to adults that don't have the same skills. And so that was the day that I realized that I love working with kids, but the way I will have the biggest impact is to work with the adults that are, spend time with kids, whether it's through work or personal connection. And so that is where we are today. So today we're going to build a framework that is going to share what the important role of adults is in children's regulation. So we're going to cover some important terms that are going to help give us this shared language. We're going to understand a little bit about the brain and the nervous system and how that impacts regulation. We're going to recognize the importance. This is the whole key here of our safe, trusting relationships, and this idea of relational safety on our development and survival as a species. And then we're going to identify some key strategies for effective co-regulation. So quite a lot to do in the next 52 minutes, but we're going to do it. So let's talk about regulation and mental health. This definition I heard in a podcast from Dr. Lisa D'Amour about 1.5 years ago, and I've been obsessed with it ever since, and I share it with everybody that I present to. But this idea that mental health is having feelings that make sense in the context you are in, and being able to handle those feelings in ways that give relief and do no harm. And what I love about this is that it is not that mental health is about finding ways to be happy, right? Which I think is a lot of the time what we've been conditioned to feel is that anything less than happy, there's something wrong and we need to fix it. We need to read this self-help book. We need to go exercise. And so this idea that mental health encompasses all the feelings, because being a human being is about riding this roller coaster, right? We have ups and downs and twists and turns, and all feelings are welcome because all feelings have information, and it's the human experience. But the feelings, it's about how we handle the feelings and how we're able to manage them and how we're able to move through them, not just push them away, but move through. And I love this. And I've started using this with my 6-year-old, not in a more, developmentally appropriate way, but thinking about how did we handle these feelings in a way that helped us and gave us relief? Did it make us feel better? But also, did it not harm ourselves or others? I just love that framework, because when we're thinking about how we regulate, so often we get into we kind of go back to some maladaptive skills that we've learned, right? We might yell at somebody or throw something or break something. Those things, they feel better, right? Like when we can just like smash something, it can help get that anger out, but now we've harmed someone or something, right? Or we might have harmed ourselves. This is just a really excellent framework that I hope, if you take away anything today, that it might be this reframe if you needed it. So now let's just, I knew I went ahead. So self-regulation, this is the ability, and regulation in general. So when we think about regulation, our body is regulating in all different ways all the time. When it's this idea that our body is always trying to maintain this level of balance. So if we are thinking about, when we get hungry, we go to eat so that we can get back into, and when we feel too full, like we can go either way, but really we just want to be in a state where we're not feeling super hungry. So we do things to regulate that. We eat, we move our bodies. And so when we're talking about self-regulation today, I'm specifically talking about emotional regulation. And so this is the ability to manage our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. I love that Stuart Shanker uses this analogy of, a car accelerating. And so if we think about our nervous system, that is where our fight flight mode lives. It's also where our parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest, this all the automated features in our body, in our nervous system. And so our brain controls the nervous system. But our brain, does anybody know how old we are when our brains are fully developed? You can just unmute if you happen to know and call it out.
25?
Yeah, like 25, 26. Some say, there's, and again, this is all with a caveat that brain science is still so new. It's so exciting. It's still so new. So probably in 10 years, we're going to learn something completely different. But right now, this is based in what we know. Lisa Feldman Barrett, she's one of my favorites. If anybody wants to look her up, 7.5 Lessons on the Brain. Beautiful, beautiful book, quick read. But our nervous system is our safety detector. And so, the younger we are, the less, or the developmental stage that we're in, any trauma exposure, all of that impacts our body's ability to regulate our nervous system. And so I like to give this visual similar to that of a little kid trying to drive a car, right? And so you're going to have a kid that they can barely touch the wheels. They can't even, so when we think about our regulation, the really young babies, like they can't even regulate on their own. They have their adult, they're grown up, kind of helping to soothe them. And then we have kids that maybe like a little 6-year-old, maybe they can, if they just get there, they can barely reach the pedal, but then it goes too fast, or like they get the brake and it's all over the place, right? And as we get a little bit older, we're able to start controlling it a little bit more. But again, there might be things that make it difficult, even as someone that's older. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about our regulation right now. And so conversely, we've got dysregulation. And so that is this inability when we're lacking capacity, and anybody can become dysregulated. I'm sure all of us have experienced dysregulation, in the last 24 hours at some point, right? So things can impact that, our overloaded sensory system, if we're tired, if we're hungry. I mean, anybody else here get hangry like me? I mean, that is a huge dysregulator. And so it can create these moments where you see, we might act out, or where we might just withdraw and shut down. And so we also, it can impact when we're in this dysregulated survival state, it can impact our ability to learn or hear language appropriately, or be able to use our logic and reason and our executive function. So some common misconceptions when we're talking about self-regulation, and I see this when I work in schools where I coach teachers, and so I get to be in the classroom a lot. And, it just sometimes seems that there's this assumption that once kids reach kindergarten, they should just be able to do certain things, and they should be able to get themselves together and regulate on a regular basis. And as we've established, that's really not realistic. Our brains are still, when you think about that, if our brains are not fully developed until 25, 26, 5 is just still, you're just in such an infancy of your brain development. And so it's really not appropriate to expect them to be able to do these things right away. Also, the idea, so often we look at the behavior as the face value, like the behavior is a thing we need to address, when really the behavior is most likely a symptom of some underlying challenge dysregulation. And so this idea that, the misbehavior is a sign of a child that's bad, or being manipulative. And I love Ross Green. His quote, kids do well when they can, because what he says is that kids, if you assume kids are doing well when they want to, which most school systems are kind of working on that basis, then you have to work to get them to want to do well, right? And so that's where we get reward systems and punishment and all of that. But if we can go back to kids do well when they can and assume everybody wants to do well, but if they're not doing well, it's because they can't, there's a skill that's missing, that they need to be taught. And there's a need they're trying to meet that's just overwhelmed their system. So if we can do that, well, now we have this opportunity because now there's a skill that we can help teach. And so that is a much, I think, more helpful framework. So we can look and come from a state of all kids are good and just need to maybe learn some skills in order to move through their emotions in a different way. The other misconception is that, once a child or person learns how to self-regulate, that they should always be able to do it. And I think everybody on this call is a prime example of that. Obviously, that's not true, that we all have our moments like we were talking about before, where we're hungry, we're tired, we've had a terrible day at work, we've been completely stressed, we're burned out, and we just can't do some of the things that we might normally do. We snap at our partner, we yell at our kids, we, make a mistake at work, or, whatever those things are. And that's not a commentary on who we are as people. It's just that it just is showing that it's a symptom of maybe something that's going on. Maybe we need to be able to take a little bit better care of ourselves, or ask for help, or whatever that is, build our capacity. And then finally, the last misconception is that the goal of regulation is always to be calm, or that regulation means calm. Because again, if we're thinking about regulation in terms of this mental health, regulation is really dependent on the situation that we're in, right? So if we are think about, if we're at a concert and we're jumping up and down and we're screaming and we're singing the songs, that doesn't mean that that person is dysregulated. It just means that they're really excited and they're at a concert, right? But if that same person is in the classroom and they're jumping up and down and they're screaming, well, maybe in that moment, that's not the appropriate way that, everybody is supposed to be. So that is, a sign that maybe we need to support or find a different way to be learning, or however that might be. So the bottom line is that regulation does not equal calm. Regulated just means you're in a state that makes sense for the time that you're in. And sometimes what is perceived to be calm might be withdrawal, right? So we've got kids that we are with that might just be really, we might describe them as laid back, or they just go with the flow, or they're always, and sometimes those are just kids that have maybe shut down, or they've just learned to be able to mask, or, be able, and we might also find, when we think about ourselves, that we have done that in our lives where we appear calm, like the duck going over water, right? You have this, it looks so calm and serene, but if you were able to see underneath, you'd see them paddling for their lives. And so a lot of times that's kind of what's going on underneath. Doesn't mean always, but I don't want that. I'm just trying to break the association of regulated and calm. So I'm just going to give this little demonstration instead of showing the video. But if you are not familiar with Dr. Dan Siegel, I highly recommend his work. But he has this really great example of what happens in a dysregulated state. And he calls it flipping your lid. And it's just a way to understand what's going on in the brain. So the way he does the hand model is he talks about how, the wrist and the bottom of the hand, that's your brainstem. And then here we've got, and this isn't 100%, this is just a basic, very crude example, but I think it gives a good visual of what's going on. So then we've got the middle center part in your brain. That's the limbic system. That's where the amygdala lives. The amygdala is our alarm system, right? That's where when something is new and uncertain, we used to call it the fear center, but now they're realizing it's more of a novelty detector. And then it's our prefrontal cortex, this part here that kind of tells the story about, is this a threat? Do we need to be aware? Do we need to change something in our body to survive? So so you can see that when we're in this calm, regulated state, everything is kind of connected, right? We've got like that limbic system, that emotional state, and we've got our cortex that's kind of just covering it. And of course, they don't actually detach in a moment. This is just the visual, but they're all, remember, we've got these neurons and these neural pathways, and they're all connected. If you think of those airline maps where you see all the lines of where the airlines can fly, that's kind of what's going on in our brain, because, you know, you have multiple ways you can get from, you know, San Diego to New York. You might have to cross through like Chicago or Atlanta, but there's all different ways you could still get to the same place. So that's what's happening, is these systems in our brain. And so when we get dysregulated, what Dr. Siegel shows is that what happens is we flip our lid. And what that means is that the connections, the pathways that talk to each other from our prefrontal cortex, this is where we make our great decisions. This is the area that kind of develops last in our brain. So, you know, the impulse control, the planning, the time management, all of those executive functions live here, and good decision making. And so the alarm goes off, our lid is flipped, and now they're not talking to each other. That's totally, so that when I said before that when you're in this dysregulated state, you can't, you know, rationalize, you can't, because they're not talking to each other. The pathways have been kind of shut down. It's like road closed, Wi-Fi off. And so what needs to happen, so when you have a child that's having a tantrum and you know, you're trying to, you know, talk to them rationally and say, it's okay, we're going to do, they can't hear you. They're not ready to listen. They're not ready to hear you know, a consequence or a boundary. So what we need to do is help them to come back to calm, and that's when we come back online. And so it's just like on a website, when the Wi-Fi is out, the website hasn't gone away, it's just that we can't get to it right now. So we have to wait until we get back online. So we're going to talk about how to do that. And so co-regulation, last definition before we dive in, is simply when one person helps another person to regulate. And so if any of you have been familiar of this term before, some people feel I know that some people have thought that this is only something that happens when children are young, right? That, you know, you think of the parent that is holding the infant, or, you know, helping the 2-year-old, but really we co-regulate with others all the time. I was watching the Beckham documentary, and I am only, as far as Ted Lasso and then Welcome to Wrexham, like this is I used to play soccer, but this is my, you know, English soccer like journey, is just that. Like, I'm not a big soccer watcher. However, in the documentary, they are showing clips from games. And there's this one game where, you know, it's coming down to the wire and Beckham shoots the ball, and it was incredible. It was this beautiful goal, and the whole stadium goes wild. And I am on an airplane as I'm watching this, and I start to tear up, and my face is just like I felt like I was one of the people in the stands immediately. I'm sitting on an airplane, everybody else is quiet, there's nothing else, nothing exciting around me, but in that moment I have regulated and upregulated to the excitement that those people in the crowd. I actually rewound it because it felt so good, and I watched it again. And so when we think about co-regulation, we can regulate into a more you know, regulated calm state. We can regulate into a more excited state. We can regulate, think about if you've ever walked into a room and somebody's in a bad mood, and immediately you're like, oh God, you can immediately feel that, right? Like you can just, and maybe you're like, I need to get out of here. I don't want to get that, you know? So this is what I'm talking about by co-regulation. So we can be really conscious of how we can make those connections with others. And so when we're talking about co-regulation in terms of supporting somebody and helping them come from a dysregulated state into a regulated state, we have to have a calm nervous system and a regulated nervous system in order to allow that. Two dysregulated nervous systems cannot regulate each other. And so that is where we are in terms of this. Okay, so what is our role in supporting children's regulation? I've kind of already teased it out, but we're going to dive in a little bit. So these are the elements to build regulation skills. We cannot get to child self-regulation until we start with our own regulation. We then can get to, so once we have become, you know, effective regulators on our own, that's when we can do some co-regulating, and then we can start to work with the child. So more specifically, our role is to be the safe space for children to learn how to regulate their bodies and emotions by first being an effective self-regulator ourselves, by prioritizing connection and relationship. And we're going to talk more about why. Modeling is so crucial, modeling these ways to regulate. Kids are always watching. Then we can also work on co-regulating in those challenging moments. And finally, practicing coping strategies. And so you'll see on this list, 4 of the 5 things are things that we as the adult do for ourselves. Because it's not about as much about teaching the child. I love teaching these regulation skills. I love teaching mindfulness. I love teaching kids how to breathe. They are natural and they love it, and we should be doing it. But again, the key, it will not stick until the adults that they are with also know how to do these skills. All right, so let's talk a little bit about building our own capacity to support others. So just by either show of hands or just in the chat, just thinking about how many of you were taught how to effectively regulate your own emotions before you graduated from high school. I've been asking this question and it's been really fun to see the answer. I'm seeing lots of no's. And the only time, I'm waiting to see if I get any yeses. The only time I've seen a few yeses has been, and I make the joke, I say, if you were born in the 2000s, there's a tiny chance that you were at like the very beginning of the SEL wave that came into schools, right? Like maybe in your last couple of years of high school. So those of us born in the 1900s, we are just like totally out of luck. And yeah, so it wasn't talked about except for behavior, right? It was all about behavior when we were kids. Nobody cared what we thought, what we felt. It was just, are you well behaved? Are you a good kid? And so we all learned pretty quickly what that meant. And so and some of us might have been really challenging because it was hard to be able to, mask ourselves or mold ourselves to do that. So these are skills. So this is why this is such a crucial time, because we are all having to unlearn and relearn things that alongside of our kids. So I talk about this with my daughter all the time. And I say, look, you and I, we're doing this together. Like I'm still figuring it out. The difference is that our brains, maybe we don't yet have the ability, but our brains have the capacity to learn it. Our younger kiddos, again, because of their development, they don't quite have the full capacity. They have some capacity, and the more they practice and the more they, get that with us, that capacity will grow. But as fully, grown, assuming everybody here is over 25, 26, maybe there's some younger. But we also, again, know that trauma can impact it. There's lots of things. They're neurodivergent brains, like there's all different reasons. And again, that's why I say in 10, 15 years, we're probably going to have this information is going to be null and void, and there's going to be some really new, cool thing, which I can't wait to know about. But we're going with the best that we have right now. So why are we going to focus on our own regulation? Again, because it builds our capacity. It gives us that patience, that calmness, that regulation that we need. It builds trust and safety in kids, right? If they know that we're not going to fly off the handle when they're having a hard time, that we don't see their big emotions as being too much. It allows us to respond versus react. This is mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is not just sitting and meditating. Mindfulness is about bringing awareness and non-judgmental awareness, right? And being really purposeful and intentional about understanding what's happening in our bodies, understanding what's happening in our environments, and knowing what we need to do. So we get that little bit of extra time to respond versus react. And just simply put, oh gosh, anybody's an Office fan.
My God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm. What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure? Stay calm! Wait. Everybody calm down! No!
So a dysregulated adult cannot support regulation in a dysregulated child. And I just love this. Anybody else is an Office fan? Just the idea that if you're not familiar with the show, the person that is speaking is Michael Scott. He is the manager of The Office. There is a fire drill that the assistant to the regional manager has created, but he's actually set a real fire. So everybody is legitimately panicking. And you think about, this is supposed to be your leader, and he's coming out and he's panicking. And now nobody wants to follow him, right? And so it's the same thing when we are in a dysregulated state. If a child is acting out, it triggers us, and then we are yelling at them, or just, getting rushed, or whatever it is that that is telling the child, okay, this is not a safe, sturdy person. If anybody's familiar with Dr. Becky Kennedy, she uses this word sturdy leader. And I love that, because it's this idea that, we're there, we're present, we're not going to be knocked over. Another analogy or story that I love is that my boss will tell is, if anybody's ever been to an amusement park and on a roller coaster, you get on the roller coaster and you put the lap belt down, and then who comes around but that 15-year-old kid that's like very underpaid and just comes with one finger and tries to lift the thing. And so what do you do as soon as that kid walks by? You shake that bar, right? Because you're like, oh, not today. I am not falling out of this thing today, right? And so when we think about ourselves and our relationship with our students or with our children, we are the bar. The kids are shaking us all the time to say, are you safe? Are you gonna fall over? Or are you gonna explode so that is the test. And so we have to show, like, nope, we're here. I got you. I'm not gonna let you fall out of this roller coaster. So what are some tools? I can't overstate that sleep, how crucial sleep is. And this is somebody that went to bed very late last night. But I've now learned that I do these nights strategically. I don't do them multiple nights in a row. My brain turns on at 11 o'clock. So sometimes I just do that to be able to work. But sleep is so crucial. Mindful practices, whatever that looks like for you. It could just be slowing down, taking a walk, noticing the sounds around you. Emotional literacy, Dr. Feldman Barrett talks about being able to name what you're feeling in a very specific way can really be helpful in being able to navigate it. Just so more than mad, sad, happy, but, lonely, disappointed, frustrated, being able to have that nuance and that just more specificity is really helpful. Managing expectations, especially if you work with students in the classroom. So again, knowing that the expectation of kids being able to self-regulate is not developmentally appropriate. How freeing to know that information, right? So being able to know what you can expect and what, that can help really inform. If you're constantly expecting too much from yourself or others, or, it just is a recipe for more frustration, and which is very depleting. Breathing exercises can be really helpful. Just some basic breathing. We'll go over some at the end that you could do for yourself and for kids. Just moving your body, whether it's dancing or yoga or walking or running. Again, some people love to run, some don't. So not all types of movement are going to be regulating for everybody. Having self-compassion is so difficult, but so important to know that we're all human. We all have these struggles. There's a lot of challenges with social media and detriment, but I also think one of the strengths of it is that it does show this common humanity. And so many times I've watched a video or seen a picture and been like, oh, they're experiencing that too. I thought that was just me. And so just this ability to know that you're not alone in some of these struggles can be really helpful, and to give yourself grace. And then there's this idea of the body budget. And it's similar, this idea. So again, this comes from Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she talks about this idea that our brains are predictive organs, not responsive organs. So we're not reacting all the time. We're actually predicting based on past experience how much energy we're going to need, what we're going to need to react. Is this a new threat, or is this something we already know? And so because of that, our bodies are constantly using energy. And so we need to make sure, just like a financial budget, that we're not just allowing these withdrawals, which are not bad. Everything in our life takes energy, right? Doing work with kids, just being alive, everything takes energy, but we need to make sure, just like with our finances, our financial withdrawals are not bad either. They let us live in a house and go on vacation and buy our food, and all of those things are great. You just need to have the deposits happening too. So some examples, again, of what, and everybody's list is going to be different. So I recommend taking a moment, maybe after we finish today, to just make draw a line down the middle, put deposits on top, withdrawals on the other side, and just make your list. What are the things that are deposits for you? What are the things that are withdrawals? I love looking at the withdrawal side and thinking, like, what are the things that actually don't need to be here? Can I remove any of them completely? Or are there things on this list that I can outsource or ask for help for? So one of my things is grocery shopping. I hate grocery shopping. My husband loves grocery shopping. So when he gets the chance, he does it. If he's not available to do it, then I've started using Instacart, and it just takes out a couple of the steps. So now I just have to do the list and I have to put the groceries away, but I don't have to go to the store, and it makes it so much easier. So just things like that. Are there things that we can ask other people for help on, or, whatever that is? Also to know that sometimes one day something might be a withdrawal and another day it might not be. So, an example I would give, although I have significantly cut down on, having a glass of wine at the end of the day because I felt like it was impacting my sleep. But often my husband and I would like to, at the end of the night, we'd have a glass of wine, we'd watch a show, we'd sit together. It was like very nice in a way that we would come together and kind of a deposit for ourselves. But I would say, where that would become a withdrawal is if we decide to have maybe another 2 or 3 glasses of wine, and then we'd watch 3 or 4 shows. And now, again, we're impacting our sleep. We're going to wake up tired, maybe with a headache, those types of things. So now that thing that was really nice with a deposit for us has quickly become a withdrawal. So again, it's not a hard and fast thing. It's just something to be aware of. Again, this is the mindfulness practice that if we can just, and I highly recommend writing it down. I talked about this for a whole year before I sat down and wrote my own, and it was illuminating, even though I talk about it all the time. So I highly recommend like pen to paper or making a note in your phone or whatever that is to take a look at these lists. So just the reflection that you can do. And also knowing, are there more ways that you can add deposits into your day or into your week? Any question? I know, Stephanie, you're manning it. So if there are any questions, I'm going to keep going because I see my time just depleting. So relationships, this is the next thing. And again, thinking about that sturdy leader. Dan Siegel says that relationships are the most important part of having well-being and being human. It's that simple and it's that important. And so when we have these maybe difficult moments or challenging moments with kids, it can be easy to prioritize when things are going well, right? And it can be easy to make those connections. Or maybe, it's also important in some of these moments to make sure that so often, we've got these in front of our faces. And I've, been hearing that the phones are kind of the next still face experiment. They had that experiment where they had a mom go completely blank and not engage with her child, and how much anxiety that brought the child in the moment because she was disconnected. And so now we have these physical barriers in front of our face, which is kind of doing the same thing. And so, of course, making that intentional time to connect, I think is important all the time. But then also it becomes more challenging in those moments where a child is struggling, when they're showing, having some behaviors, misbehavior. And again, that's coming out. And so that our first instinct is to address, this is how we were conditioned to address the behavior and assign consequences. Because if we don't punish a child, how are they going to learn not to do that behavior? But if we can, again, think to ourselves, okay, what is it actually, getting curious, what is it that this child is trying to tell me? What is the need they're trying to get met? What are they communicating? And then connect with them on that emotional level. Let them know that you're there, you see them, you're going to help them, because kids don't want to be in that state. Nobody wants to be in that dysregulated state. But again, their emotions have overwhelmed their capacity, you know, to the skills that they have. I mean, that's essentially what's happening when we see these quote unquote misbehaviors. And so we have to connect with them. Maybe we can deposit into their body budget, you know, and that can be, you know, giving them a hug or just letting them know we're there, or checking in with them. And then later on, we might ask ourselves, once they're in a more regulated state, like, what's the skill that needs to be taught, right? Because what happened in this moment, you know, their friend took their toy, they got really frustrated, they threw something, or they ripped the toy out of their hand, they fell to the ground. And so, you know, we need to teach them a different way to ask. Maybe they don't have the language. Maybe they, you know, just, or were so excited that they didn't have the impulse control to just ask first, or whatever that is. We're going to work with them on that skill. You know, kids that are older, we think about even teenagers having that impulse control where they, you know, are just wanting to do all the things that their friends are doing. And there's a lot of developmental, you know, appropriateness in that, and you know, wanting to be part of a group and belong. But we can support them. And, you know, when kids are acting out, even you know, when they yell at us or curse at us or things like that, what is it? They're not just being disrespectful, they're struggling too. And so what is it that we can help them, let them know, hey, I'm here, you know, just, you can't just, you're trying to push me away, but I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. So when you need me, I'm there. And so this is that relational safety. So the idea that when we're connected with a person, that we don't feel like they're judging us at our worst moment, right? That we feel completely safe to be able to express ourselves in great moments, as well as in our not so great moments, and that we have that safety to do so, to just fall apart and know that we've got that person there that's going to support us and care for us. So third, we want to make sure that we're modeling, right? And so this is helpful on so many levels. I mean, think about how many of you have given directions to a kid, or had a great talk with them, told them some things, and then think like they didn't hear a word I said. But then maybe the next day, or even the next moment, I've had this happen with my 6-year-old, where I'll tell her something and I'm like, well, that just went completely over her head. And then I'll hear her in her play saying the same thing to her doll that I said, you know, and you're like, oh, they really hear everything. And sometimes, you know, sometimes it's not ideal, right? Like sometimes you're like, oh no, I definitely said that word. Right. So they're sponges, they're absorbing everything. Even my teenagers, who seem totally like they're just on another planet sometimes, like I know that they're hearing the things that I say. So that's why our modeling is so important, especially for older kids who maybe don't want to be explicitly told to do something. So just being that model, showing them what it looks like. If you're in a classroom with kids, maybe they don't have those examples at home. So letting them know what, if we can express out loud and say, you know, hey, I'm really frustrated right now. And this is what I do when I'm frustrated. My frustration isn't loud and scary and stomping. My frustration is I need to stop and I need to go take a walk, take a sip of water, take a breath. And then I can come back and I want to talk to you, but I can't right now. But that's showing them that there's a sturdiness there, right? Like that we're not out of control when we're having this feeling. We're able to have the feeling and talk through it and show them what we're doing. So, you know, finding those ways to model, setting those healthy examples, even sharing stories from the day. I made a mistake at work last week, and I shared it with my daughter. I was like, oh man, this thing happened and I'm feeling really bummed about it. I'm really upset that I did this, but I'm also trying to give myself a little grace because I'm a human and I make mistakes, you know, so I have that conversation so that can become her own internal voice, that she's like, you know what, it's okay to make a mistake. We all make mistakes sometimes. And as opposed to me slamming around and being like, oh, I'm such an idiot, I can't believe, you know, because that's very real too, right? Like that's such an easy thing to, again, that's where the self-compassion comes in. So just being aware of where we are and what we're modeling with everybody around us can be so effective and so helpful. In one of the classes that because also some of the modeling just gives exposure and gives experience. So in one of the classrooms that I was coaching in last year, I had we talk about bringing these moments of regulation into the classroom and giving kids opportunities to try. So I'll kind of be in our number 5 of like ways to teach these skills. But the teacher in this moment hadn't started those, we call them resets. And so she hadn't started the resets in her classroom yet. But one day she herself has anxiety and was having a panic attack. It started kind of at the end of second period. And so as third period was coming in, she was like, I need to get myself together. And so she has a breathing exercise that her therapist had taught her, 4-7-8 breath. And so she put it up on the smart board, and she said, and now she'd already established a really great relationship with her students, but she said, hey guys, I'm struggling right now. I'm having a hard time. I need to do this breathing exercise right now so that I can be a great teacher for you today. So what I'm going to need, I need you to be silent. You're welcome to join me if you want to join me, but if you don't, that's okay too. I just need you to stay silent for the next 4 minutes or whatever it was. And then we'll get going and we'll go. And so she did the exercise. Some of the kids joined her, some of them didn't, but they were able to stay silent. They went about the rest of class. The next day, they came in and she got right into it and started the lesson. And they were like, wait, miss, can we do that breathing thing from yesterday? And she was so surprised because she hadn't like introduced resets. She hadn't explained why it's important. She hadn't told them to do it with her. She just kind of set the stage and showed them that that's what she needed in the moment. And it was really impactful as they're 7th graders because they hadn't had that experience before. So just kind of showing them and then giving them the opportunity they were wanting, and it became a regular thing in their class. And so we've established ourselves as effective regulators. We've prioritized our relationships and connections with our students and others. We're modeling. And so now we want to think about co-regulation. And so again, as I said, we're constantly co-regulating with others, just by being in the classroom. I think we can all think of somebody that when we're around, you just immediately feel calmer, right? You just immediately feel like content and at peace. And you're just like, oh, that's just a breath of fresh air, right? Or even people that are, they have really high energy and you're just like, oh, I love this too. So think about, we're doing that all the time. But then there's going to be those times that we're going to need, somebody's struggling, they're having a hard time. So they're going to actually need to borrow our nervous system. And so I just love this quote because I'm sure all of us at some point or another have been told to calm down, and nothing invokes more rage in me than when I'm being told to calm down. So I love this quote. Never in the history of calming down has someone calmed down by being told to calm down. So what do we do instead? So let's imagine we've got a child that's having a hard time. They're really struggling. Maybe they're acting out. They're, in their stress response, their fight mode maybe, or their flight mode where they're trying to run away. The first thing we need to do, and of course, these things happen in nanoseconds, but we have to check in with ourselves because again, a lot of these behaviors can be really triggering to us, right? The idea of somebody disrespecting us or just getting out of control. If we're in the classroom, it feels like a commentary on our classroom management. If we're at home, it feels like a commentary on our parenting, that we're having these big emotions. What did I do wrong? Nothing, because we're humans and humans have these big emotions all the time. But we have to make sure that we are in a place that we can stay sturdy, right? We can be that bar on the roller coaster. So check in with yourself. You need to take a breath. Of course, we want to make sure that everybody's safe. That should be the unspoken primary need. If one student is hitting another student, we have to separate that first, right? And get the child that is escalated into a place where, they're not able to hurt themselves or others, and check in with yourself, right? Stay and maybe take a breath, do what you need. Another question a really important question is, am I the person in this moment? Like, am I the person that's going to be the most helpful? And that's not always an option, but if it is, if there's a co-teacher, if you have a partner in the room, if there's another adult somewhere that maybe has a stronger relationship with that person, that child, that's a valid thing, because it's all about the support of the child in that moment. And so that's another really helpful question to ask. Am I the person? And then we want to prioritize the connection, right? We're not going to go right to the behavior. We're not going to, even if they were hitting, we don't need to talk about the hitting. Remember, they can't hear us anyway. So that hitting is telling us there's something going on, right? And this is the best skill that they have right now to express this emotion. Is it a great skill? No, it's a terrible skill. So there's that maladaptive coping. So we're going to need to teach something later, but right now, what we need to do is understand this kid is upset and dysregulated, and we need to help them. So maybe we can, if we saw what happened before, maybe we have no idea. Maybe our back was turned, we didn't see anything. So right now it's just about helping that child kind of diffuse the situation. We saw that video of Michael Scott kind of escalating, and I like to think of it as like gasoline on a fire, right? If we match their energy, it's going to explode. So we need to like bring the energy down. So ask what is it that they need? What is it, to ourselves, we're not going to ask them, but we want to acknowledge and validate. And that doesn't mean that we're condoning, right? Like, and I used to say we should help them by naming some feelings. I don't really say that anymore. I think we can be very general and just saying like, I can see something is bothering you or something is wrong. Like, we don't need to name it. We don't want to put what we think is happening. Because again, I like to think that in every situation, there's at least two problems, right? There's the child's problem, and there's the thing that is like in our mind, the problem is the hitting. But in the child's mind, the problem is that this kid took my toy and I was in the middle of something and now I need to get it back, right? So if we're putting our own problem on the child, that's not going to help solve anything. So we just need to acknowledge that they're upset, validate them, maybe remind them if they've, and we'll talk about how to practice the calming strategies later, but hopefully they've got some in their toolkit and they're, so we're going to help bring them down. And we're going to have to know every child is different. When my daughter is upset, she does not want anybody to talk to her. So we've learned this through trial and error. She has told us in so many words at the top of her lungs, stop talking to me, when she's very upset. And so now my husband and I know she needs to go up to her room for a minute. I used to be afraid that she would think she was alone. So I'd go up and I'd say, I'm right here. And now she's told me, Mom, you come up too soon. I need more. And I said, okay, I got you. Like, I'm here if you need me. But what she, used to like, she sometimes wouldn't go all the way to her room. She'd go to the steps. And then if I gave her a minute, then she wouldn't mind if I sat on the steps next to her. And then maybe sometimes I'd put my hand out and she'd hold my hand and we wouldn't talk. Now what we started to do, because she can write now, I will write her a little letter and I'll slide it under the door. And I realized like her language has gone offline, but writing is actually the thing that kind of just diffuses it for her. So once we've gotten into that, where we're diffused, we're regulated, now we can talk about it, right? Now we could say, hey, what was happening? Are you, what do we, and then we can maybe solve the problem. We can also set a boundary, and say, hey, I get it. I don't like when people take my toys either. We can't hit when other people take our toy, or we can't grab, or, whatever that is, we can set that boundary if needed, but that's the only time we can do it. We can't do it earlier when they're in their survival brain. So that is co-regulating in the moment. And again, it's going to look different for every child. This is like a basic framework, and it's going to take some trial and error. Sometimes I think it's helpful to kind of keep some notes on kids and even ask them, like, what is it that you like? Do you like it when I've started having these conversations with my daughter. Do you like when I talk to you? Do you like when I come in? Do you need more quiet time? So and it changes as they grow up, right? As they get older. So once we've established all of those things, now we can, and it's not that it's necessarily linear, but we can't just practice the coping strategies. We have to have this, it's a part of the whole holistic mode and thing that we're trying to do. So the best practice is to make sure, again, we can't just pull up a breathing exercise when the child is upset and say, here we go, like, let's do some breathing. We have to practice when they're regulated, that when they're in their learning brain, when they're able to take in the information. So, this can happen, all the time. We can have conversations. We can, again, tell stories about our day, watching books and movies, and kind of like saying, hey, what do you think that character's feeling? What would you do in this situation? Like, talking about them, practicing breathing exercises, practicing those calming strategies, and giving them some of those strategies is really helpful. Doing pretend play. Kids learn through play. They make sense of their world through play. And I like to think if Lisa Feldman Barrett is telling us that, and I realize I know I have 5 minutes, but if Lisa Feldman Barrett is telling us that our brains are predictive organs and we're predicting based on past experience, well, kids don't have that much to draw on. So when they can do this pretend play, that's building some of those like prior experiences that they can kind of rehearse and try out different ways and different reactions and let them kind of build that. So last thing is to not let perfect be the enemy of good. I love this. It's not about being perfect. We are gonna mess up. We are gonna yell at our kids. We're gonna have moments and they're gonna see it, and we're gonna think they're gonna go to years of therapy because of it, and it's okay. Like, it's not the worst. But what research is showing is that the way to securely attach is not about being fully attuned all the time, but actually it's about the repair process, and that is a predictor of truly secure attachment. That the most secure attachments are still only attuned about 30% of the time, which, let me tell you, as a parent, was like the biggest relief of my life. And so we really want to get good at repair, and not just saying I'm sorry, but really having a conversation where we never apologize for our feelings, right? But we can apologize for what we did when we were having those feelings. Maybe we yelled, maybe we turned away, whatever it was. We can tell them, I was feeling this way. So, I'm sorry I yelled. I was feeling really frustrated. But remember that our kids are never responsible for that. It's not your fault that I yelled. I was frustrated. That was my reaction. And you can share what you might do next time. Next time I should really try taking a breath or taking a walk before I try to have that conversation, and just always reinforce that you care for them, and that you're there, and you're human, right? And kids are they're great about understanding, and they're usually like, yeah, it's all good. But that act of repair, I like to think of it as a muscle. If any of you lift weights, when you lift a weight, it creates these little tears in your muscle, and it's actually the fibers that build, that kind of fill in those tears on your rest day, that make your muscles stronger. So I think about that, like our ruptures with our kids and our relationships, those are those little tears. And when we come back and repair, it kind of like fills in those tears and just makes that relationship stronger. Gonna not show that video from Inside Out, but it is a great example, if you've seen that movie, of a rupture, and when the parent getting triggered and getting really upset. But what I want to leave you all with today, and I know that was a lot of information, and my email's at the end if you have any questions, but I would love for you to reflect later on a situation that you've experienced where maybe there was a child misbehaving or just dysregulated. And think about a few things. What are some of your go-to self-regulation strategies, if you have them? And if you don't, maybe think about things you might want to try. What behaviors do you find triggering? This is, especially if you're working in a classroom, I think is a question that is so important to ask yourself, because you have to be prepared that those things are going to happen, right? And know that it's going to happen. But knowing, is it disrespectful speaking? Is it loud noises? That's mine, like lots of loud, high-pitched screeching and loud noises. What are those things? How can you fortify yourself knowing that you're going into those moments, and build your capacity so that you're able to withstand them? And still be sturdy? How might you reframe the behavior happening in a situation with the child? And how might you handle that situation differently next time? So feel free to write these down if you'd like. I know that this is recorded, so there'll be a link to this too to come back to at some point. And just a last reflective thought that when little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not join their chaos. And it says little people, but this is really for everybody. So, all right, I have no time. I did it all. But if you have any questions, please feel free. Here's my email right here. Thank you so much. I know this was a lot, but I appreciate everybody joining in today.
Thank you so much, Colleen. Really excellent information. I feel like we could be keeping talking and asking questions and all of that. So really, really just so grateful for you joining us today. The evaluation is in the chat, and I'm going to actually enter it again because we have lots of people saying thank you. So look for that evaluation. Your feedback really does help us to prepare and bring you great presentations like today's. So please join me in saying thank you to Colleen. Again, so grateful for this information. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.